meeting for June 29th, 2021 will now come to order. This meeting is live streamed and recorded on YouTube. And beginning in May, this meeting is also held in person at City Hall Council Chambers. So today we have Elaine Richardson, Brad White, who's Vice Chair, and Curtis Arnold, and I am Mary Beth Green, and I'm Chair of the Planning Commission. I'll lead the meeting. And Commissioners, thank you for coming. We have a quorum. The next item to consider is changing the Commission's rules for procedures to include allowance for remote participation by a Commissioner. As of now, the Commissioners cannot participate remote, so we want to allow that to happen just as City Council did back in, I believe, 2019. So during the June 14th Planning Commission regularly scheduled meeting, we proposed to follow in the footsteps of City Council and add a provision for remote attendance and voting. The rule is under Article 7, and their attendance sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, Commissioners, do you have any comments, thoughts, or questions?
I do.
Okay.
So this would allow for not regular virtual attendance, but when there are extenuating circumstances. Is that the case?
Yes. So, if you will indulge me, maybe it would help if I can tell you some of the things that I've discussed with Todd. Okay. And then certainly I don't usually go first, but what we decided was that we did not have a definition of our meeting that counts when we're absent and we miss 3 meetings. You know, we have that basic attendance rule, which Curtis brought up that we needed more clarity. And so under Article 2, Section 1, I would like to propose we say, and it's in, I believe, the handbook. It says, this should be considered a regularly scheduled meeting, and that's referring to our meetings on the second Monday of each month. So I believe it's in everybody's handout. Is that correct? Do you have that writing on your, okay. It's in blue. And if you go over to page 5, Article 7, Section 1 says, each member of the Planning Commission who has knowledge of the fact that he or she will not be able to attend scheduled meetings of the Commission shall notify the Planning Department at the earliest possible opportunity. And any event prior to 4:30 on the business day prior to the scheduled meeting, usually that would be Friday, but we've met on Tuesday before. So, and the recording secretary will notify the chair of the commission in the event the project absences will produce a lack of quorum, because the person that's remote does not count in the quorum according to the rules that if we're to follow in the footsteps of City Council, that's how theirs reads. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. Section 2 is, if I can skip down to the second sentence, any member who is absent from a regularly scheduled meeting, which we've defined on page 1, and that has to do with the 3 times in a calendar year. City Council, then it goes to City Council and they decide if that person should be replaced.
So just when we say that attendance absent from a regularly scheduled meeting, does that mean either virtually or physically?
Oh, goodness.
I mean, if this is approved, then
yeah, we approved.
I know there's a provision in the draft language. It talks about that you're treated equally if you attend remotely under these rules. So it's the same attendance, correct? I mean, you are present. You just have to be present remotely versus
right.
present in person.
No,
That's what this is doing.
And there's no limit to the number of times in a year you can be present remotely?
Oh.
Currently not with council and not in this ordinance. I don't think that it is.
But the open statement that members are expected to attend meetings, workshops, and other commission events in person at the designated location. However, in the event a member is prohibited from attending in person by an unusual event or circumstance. So it lays it out, and of course, then it's all going to fall on ultimately the chair and city council if there's an issue.
And so down here under 6, and all of this is all new to us, but it's mostly copying planning commission, city council. And then it says under 6, it adds in the blue words, and when the chair has been provided with a written explanation. So we're just trying to make sure people understand this is not to be used haphazardly. You know, that it's serious. Like I told you before, when I first got here the first year, Todd was here at the same time, and we had a commissioner for a whole year that we never saw. And so I said, you might need to see we have an attendance policy. So we put in the 3 missed meetings, and I think you said Bar has 2. So I guess if you don't like 3, you can do something else. So, do you have anything to add?
I've got a comment that I wanted to add. Maybe looking at this is on page 6, section 3, and I thought it might add a little more clarity, maybe to Elaine's comment that I've written in. It said only those members in attendance at the commission meeting, and I wanted, I think, to add the words either in person or electronically as defined in section 4 below, may vote on matters before the commission. That way it's very clear that if you call in or either you're here, you're able to vote. And then I guess it was a little bit about the same thought that we had also in section 4, paragraph 6, about the chair being notified. I had written up some words about the commission members requesting to attend a meeting by electronic media shall be made to the, I guess it should be made to the chairman of the planning commission and approved. And I put some timeline on how soon before a meeting you should make that request. I realize that might be somewhat subjective, but I would think we'd like to know within a few days of the meeting whether you're going to be attending remotely or not. And that might be a point for discussion, but I thought it would be good to at least prompt an individual that could not come to notify everybody so that the chair would be aware that they may be a missing person. Make the appropriate arrangements with the IT department.
Okay.
Just as a clear communication and approval. That was the only reason there. That way, everybody understood that that person would not be here and that IT would make arrangements. And the chairman agreed that it was a valid reason.
So, Art, are you able to follow?
Okay, well, what section was
I
that?
don't know.
Well, this would be a new section, I suppose.
Just adding.
Section 5?
Yeah, I guess we could make it between 5 and 6, or either extending paragraph 6 with that information in there, possibly to go there.
Well, we've got section 4
Yeah.
right here, section 4.
Well, I was looking at the subparagraphs under section 4.
Oh, okay, so you're saying between 5 and 6 under section 4.
Yes.
Okay, insert, so 6 would become 7. And that,
Yeah, we'll just add one that would be
Yeah.
clear about that.
Could you state again what would
Yeah.
you would insert?
I knew it was
What's
coming.
number 6?
it's fewer words.
Number 6, commission members requesting to attend a meeting by electronic media shall be made to the chairman of the commission no later than, I put 5 business days, but that may be too far ahead, but I would think that we'd like to put some, at least 2 business days ahead. That way you could make appropriate arrangements. I don't know how fast IT can react. I'm sure same day, but we'd give them at least a day or 2 to provide some changes.
We've got something else in here that is, it's actually, they have until 4:30 p.m. on the business day prior. So we should, I think that should stay the same.
Well, that was basically 2 days, 2 business days here, so maybe
Well, it's,
if we feel good about that, we'll just take that off and I'll put it over here.
I guess it's kind of already.
Well, the 2 days is already there. That would be the add there,
So maybe not put in,
not put a timeline in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
so take that out, take section 6 out. Because we're telling them they have to notify us before. At the earliest, if you're gonna miss, and so what you're saying, if you're gonna be remote, instead, you want to make that different. But still be maybe the same time.
That's the same thing.
Okay, so keep that. All right.
So
Is
we're
it
just
clear?
really adding the thing that's stating that if you're requesting, you make a request to the chairman of the planning commission, and you're not going to put a timeline on it.
No.
We've already got it.
We already leave the timeline in this.
So, yeah, okay, that clarifies it.
Okay. So is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the revised rules of procedure as we have gone over today with the adjustments and changes that have been made during our discussion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Is there any more discussion? Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Please note that the vote is positive unanimously. All right. The rule changes have succeeded. And I just want to let you know that before we start the next item, that Jackie Myers is now participating remotely, and she has all the rights that we have. And Jackie, are you ready? Jackie?
Well, thank you, everybody. I am here.
Yay! It worked. Well, you're official.
Well, thank you.
You're official. Okay.
I'm official. Okay.
So the next item is consideration of a possible amendment, or of possible amendments 2021 R04 proposed text amendment. And I believe that staff, as in Todd and maybe Art too sometimes, you are going to explain this to us.
Well, good evening. This is the same ordinance that y'all voted on before, and y'all made a couple of recommendations at that time back in May, and that when this was presented to council and they heard from various members of the public and property owners that they wanted to explore the idea of eliminating the minimum acreage for a planned development. And so that's what's before you tonight, is the request by council that the Planning Commission consider removing the minimum acreage requirement. And that in speaking with the city attorney, that her recommendation is that that is the only matter which the Planning Commission can vote on tonight. That y'all can discuss anything you'd like, but the only actionable item relates to the removal of the minimum acreage requirement for a PD. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Todd, I've got a question for you. Has the city attorney's opinion changed from
I didn't quite understand you, Curtis.
Has the city attorney's opinion changed since she gave us legal guidance, I guess about a month ago, prior to the previous meeting?
I defer to her to answer that. I am not aware of any position change or any documentation of a position change since what she prepared previously, Curtis.
Yeah, I was referring to the staff report that was provided.
Right. We have not heard anything different than that.
Okay, was that her position that not everything must be a PD or something like that? She would agree with that?
Don't have that in front of me, but
Right.
a couple of the points that she made included that it brought into question whether or not you were forcing people into a contract by making it by a PD, and I think she was questioning whether or not having a PD on, let's say, a quarter-acre site where it's one building, whether or not that was in keeping with the spirit of the law as it was written at the state level to create districts. I think those were the two main sticking points that she had, or the cautions or the comments she had. Do you remember anything else? Or
Those were the two big ones. I can't.
those were the two that I recall. But those were that was her position then, and to my knowledge, that position has not changed.
So then, I guess, what you would be saying is that, for a commercial district, if the developer or petitioner wanted residential in there, that it's not available just as straight commercial development. That if they wish to have residential, they need to start a PD process.
That is
Which
correct.
would come through the planning commission. Okay.
That's
And
correct.
so, as it is right now, the only property that could come through the planning commission would be those which are at least 2 acres.
That is correct.
Okay.
And that there was, in talking to members of council and the implementation committee, this was not voted on by council, but it seemed to be unanimous that they wanted y'all to take up this matter. And that the ordinance, the PD ordinance in regards to minimum size has 2 components. It's a 2-acre minimum unless you are surrounded by R20 and R12, our traditional neighborhood zonings, in which case you have a minimum of 4 acres. When staff was drafting language that we thought reflected council's wishes, we left that part in there, and so that there would still be a minimum for a PD within the R20 and R12. Everywhere else, there would be no minimum.
And
'Cause
so when an R20 or an R12 is across the street,
Correct.
even a big street, it still counts as around.
That is correct. The way the ordinance says is that locations across a street or alley are considered to be adjoining. And so if you think about it, we do, that protects our existing neighborhoods by requiring a minimum of 4 acres. And of course, even if somebody were to assemble 4 acres in one of our neighborhoods, does not mean the planning commission or council would approve or support it. So, but it does establish a minimum acreage. So that was, sometimes it's easier to edit. So this is exactly what I said, but in a written format. And it's just, it might be easier for y'all to use this as a starting point. Because all this does is it reiterates what I says. This is a PD must be a minimum of 4 contiguous acres when adjoined solely by R20 or R12. and that locations across the street or alley are considered to be adjoining. However, PDs which are not adjoined solely by R20 or R12 have no minimum acreage requirement. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Todd, has there been a timeline established for, there's been a lot of discussion about whether this was a temporary timeline. I haven't seen any of that papers in 6 months, 3 months. Is there some thought on where this is going to go?
That has been discussed by council. I don't think anything has been decided. I know that the first time this came through the planning commission, I think in March, y'all made that recommendation that it have some sort of timeline. My recollection is y'all didn't specify the timeline, but you specified or requested that it be accompanied with the timeline. And I know that that's been a discussion amongst council, but I don't think a decision has been made on that.
In listening to June the 7th council meeting, they did talk about, I heard the term 6 months, and I heard the term sunset, and I heard over and over the term temporary until the implementation of the next committee's white paper, I guess you'd say.
And I think that's an accurate reflection, Mary Beth, that setting a date is the sunset legislation or the sunsetting of the ordinance would kind of give a timeline, something to work towards with the committees to work towards to implement ordinance changes. But I repeat that to my knowledge, a specific timeline has not been determined yet by council as to when and if they will set that date.
It sounded like to me until it's voted on, maybe by naming a future date, it would naturally change into what they want to be permanent. That's how I read it.
Right.
But when we make a change, that's what the ordinance is at that time, right?
Repeat, please.
If we propose something, and we approve it, and then council approves it, that's what the ordinance is, regardless. And then you could come back with a different one to change
Correct.
it
Yeah,
in
this-
6 months or a year or
Right.
never.
Correct. If you put in, sometimes a government will put in a deadline for themselves, and they will say this ordinance is in place for a period of time, at which point that ordinance reverts back to something different, and that is specified. And sometimes it is done because they intended to be a temporary measure, and that they wanted to establish that time frame. There are various reasons why you could have an expiration date for an ordinance. However, I think to your point, Elaine, is that council has the ultimate authority to establish these guidelines, to extend a deadline, to create a deadline. That's by design that council has the decision-making power. And so that whatever is set can be changed. Council can say, well, we have new information and we'd like to do something different now that we have this new information. So
I sit on the implementation committee, and as one of the two planning commissions members representation on it, and there's several council members on that too. And one of the things through in that discussion through the implementation, what's in that implementation committee we talked about. Sounds a little different than what you're saying. I'm not sure that I'm real clear with what yours is, but they're recommending to take out the minimum acreage requirement for PDs located in commercially zoned districts. There is no minimum acreage for PDs in commercially zoned districts.
And that's exactly what
Okay,
this
so
says.
PDs must be a minimum of the 4 contiguous acres then located in wow. PDs in all other zoning districts must be a minimum of 2 contiguous acres.
That's what the
Okay,
ordinance currently
so that's
says.
not clear in what you just handed us. It's clearer to me in what I just said.
I will let you all decide that. The ordinance before you has the language that requires a minimum acreage. What I provided, which you do not have to utilize, was a sample draft language that I believe reflects what council and the implementation of the land use committee recommended, which was the elimination of a minimum acreage. And so how y'all choose to craft that, I defer to you.
So, in other words, under 195030, where it says a PD shall encompass a minimum of 2 contiguous acres, we can change that to not requiring a minimum acreage. All right.
And
So we want to, okay, go
No,
ahead.
I'm just
I want
being
commissioners to ask their questions or comments, and I need to include Jackie in just a minute.
Okay.
But you go ahead, and then I want the public. I'm going to ask for, so the public can call in. I believe the number is 864-653-9886. And since there's a time lag, we'll go ahead and continue to make comments, get Jackie, and then any public that wants to come forward.
so I guess I'm asking Todd, in this one that you have, there is no case in which there's ever a minimum of 2 acres for a PD?
If you're referring to the sheet I just handed out with the blue language,
The one single page that you just handed us. Okay.
right, with the blue lettering, that it says there is the only minimum is for those PDs that are completely surrounded by R20 and R12. That's the language that is already in the ordinance. This ordinance was derived primarily to address residential and commercial districts. So that 4-acre minimum would never apply to a commercial district because it's not surrounded by residential. For all other zoning districts, except for those surrounded by R20 and R12, there would be no minimum acreage. I encourage you to, it's pretty clear. I think at the last sentence, if you read it out loud, it says that unless you're surrounded by R20 or R12, there is no minimum acreage.
What if you're surrounded by RM 1 or 2 or 3 or 4?
There is no minimum acreage. It's only if you're surrounded by R20 and R12. And you can eliminate that, and you can simply say there is no minimum acreage for any PD, period. That's completely up to the planning commission to make a recommendation.
So we're just looking at minimum acreage. That's all that we're allowed to vote on.
Correct.
We can discuss the rest of this if we wish, but the only part we're going to vote on is whether or not to change the minimum requirement.
That was the recommendation
In the
that came.
Commercial districts, that's what I'm trying to make clear.
Apparently it's anywhere, right?
This is for y'all to
I
decide.
mean, right now it says a PD encompasses let's see.
So I'm kind of reading what you've written here as PDs which are not joined solely by R12 or R20 have no minimum acreage, so you could have somebody with half an acre requesting a PD?
If there is no minimum acreage, then you could have 100 square foot PD, theoretically. There's no, you could
I think
have.
it'd be better when you're not speaking into that.
I'm sorry. I know, and it's weird. I have a hard time hearing y'all
To be
also.
recorded, he has to speak in the
Yeah.
microphone.
I know,
It's a catch-22.
I'll speak louder. No minimum acreage is just that. So it could be 100 square feet. It could be 250 acres. There's no minimum acreage.
We want that?
This is for y'all to decide.
Well, what we're talking about is Article 4, non-residential districts and district regulations. So we're in non-residential districts only, right?
Well, I don't know, because
That's the only thing.
No, because this is
Is that not right?
Article 5 is PD district regulations. It doesn't say anything about commercial versus non-commercial.
Correct. The existing language did not, the only kind of zoning specification that it has in there is that when that ordinance was drafted, and I was not a part of the staff when that occurred, but my assumption would be that the commission, staff, and council felt like that properties completely surrounded by our traditional neighborhoods, the R20 and R12, deserved a little more protection, and they wanted to put a larger minimum acreage, and that's where the 4 acres came from. It's been in the ordinance like that for well over a decade.
questioning that part.
And so then, but that's the only distinction. Then after that, in the existing ordinance, it just says all other PDs have to be at least 2 acres. It does not say commercial RM1, RM2, CM, CP2. It just says all other PDs have a minimum of 2 acres. I think what council wants y'all to weigh in on is to make a recommendation as to eliminating that requirement, and to your point, Elaine, that if you're concerned about eliminating it everywhere, or maybe just making the recommendation to eliminate it in certain districts, I think it's wide open, and they're seeking your input as to what y'all think is the way to go.
Good catch.
So 19-503 is for PD anywhere.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, do you have any comments, or shall we
This is
listen?
the very first, this is sort of the beginning of that ordinance, which, very early on is establishing what the regulations are going to be, the district regulations. And the first order of business, if you will, is there a minimum size? And that's pretty common when you're creating a district, as to how big must a district be, or how big can a district be.
What would the density per acre be? As far as the number of beds per acre is?
With plan developments, that the purpose of the plan development is to allow the commission, the public, and the council to make that decision on a case-by-case basis. It is not predetermined, and it's not predetermined by design, because there might be a situation where over here you want 200 per acre, but over here you only want 20 per acre, depending upon a host of factors. So the maximum density is not currently established in the PD, and I'm not aware of PD ordinances that establish a maximum or minimum density, because y'all have that decision-making power on every time you're on a case-by-case basis, and it provides greater flexibility to the municipality to make the right decision for that situation. So in this case, our ordinance does not have a maximum density. We do specify that part of the development of a PD, that one of the things we're going to, ask you to do or require of you as the applicant is to determine what that maximum density will be. that will be spelled out. Every PD that we've been a part of, I say we, Art and I, our existing staff, that is spelled out in the ordinance, what is the maximum density.
So what we're voting on tonight, if we get a motion, is that a PD anywhere does not have to include 2 continuous acres. And it applies to we're looking at the non-residential because it no longer has the ability to have residential. And there was some consternation that people were saying they couldn't develop the property the way they wanted or the way the buyer of their property would want. So it decreased the value of the property. That's what I heard when I listened to June 7th, City Council. But it's a good catch to say, as Lane said, that it applies to every PD everywhere in the city.
But I don't think that was the intent of when the implementation committee was recommending, but removing the 2 minimum acre, it was in the C districts, not in all the other districts.
I understand, but this is the way it was. So what they did was they were limited when they decided to go to the no residential. Then they found out, oops, we can't do a PD. We can do a PD. They wanted to have them come through as a PD, but then they got tripped up by the 19503, and people were objecting to their property not being included. The people who wanted to have the option to have residential.
Okay.
And I think that is the purpose.
The existing ordinance is a PD shall encompass a minimum of 2 contiguous acres.
Right.
However, then it brings in the exception for the R12, R20. If we remove that and put this language in that Todd has given us, then we're taking the minimum 2 acre requirement out of any district.
Right.
And I'm saying we don't need to. I think we need to do it out of the commercial district, but we need to leave it so that if you're in the RM2 district, you have to have a minimum of 2 contiguous acres before you could run a PD.
It's up to quorum here, I guess, or majority. I'm sorry. Let's see. And we've got Jackie. Jackie,
Yes, ma'am.
do you have any questions or comments or great, profound things to say?
I don't know about great profound things, but we are just talking about commercial areas, right? We're not dealing with any residential as far as the minimum acreage, correct? Just want to make sure I'm understanding.
I believe what this says is a PD shall encompass a minimum, and it's talking about a planned development, and these are PD district regulations. So wherever you have a PD, we would, if we change A, it is a minimum of 2 contiguous acres everywhere. It's not just commercial. And Elaine is questioning, she's thinking that it should just apply to the commercial districts.
The intent with the implementation committee.
Well, my concern is again for the encroachment onto residential areas, with the spillways, with the the buffer areas and so on. If we're talking about a PD, and more than likely we're talking about student housing.
So you're concerned that it strictly be limited to the commercial areas and not anywhere else. But when we say minimum of 2 contiguous acres, we're also clarifying that it is only pertains to commercial districts. I never thought about it that way. So
2 acres.
And again, this was, as I mentioned, it says sometimes it's easier to edit than to start from scratch. So this was not, trying to tell y'all what to do. What I think, but hearing what you said, by having this, we could say that PDs which are not adjoined solely by R20 or R12 districts, just like we have in here now, but are in residential districts, have a minimum of 2 acres. And then PDs in commercial districts shall have no minimum acreage. Because doesn't that address your concern?
Yeah, so there is no minimum acreage requirement for PDs located in commercially zoned districts.
Correct.
PDs must be a minimum of 4
Yes.
acres when bordered by, however, it's adjoined solely by R12 or R20. And then explains what that is. PDs in all other zoning districts must be a minimum of 2 contiguous acres.
Perfect.
That's it. I mean, that's what I was trying to say.
That's what you would like.
do. Yeah.
Okay, so, do we have any phone calls? Okay, is there anyone from the public that wishes to come to the podium and speak to us? And we'll need your, name and address, and we try to limit it to 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. You'll
You
be
can
signed
ask
first.
for-
or-
Sign sheet back there.
And you can ask for an extension.
Okay.
We're pretty good about willingness to stay on, I would say.
My name is John Crowley. I live at 111 Gregory Street here in Clemson.
111 what?
Gregory Street?
Oh, Greg.
Yes, ma'am. Just concerning, I had a few notes about this whole overall ordinance that I've been hearing about it over the months, but since the actionable item tonight is the size requirement, I'll try to stick to that, and if I got time for some other points, I can stick those in. As far as the city code goes, in order to get a PD zoning, there are a list of requirements you have to have. You can't just give it to anybody. You have to have housing of different types and densities along with another use. If you take a half-acre lot downtown, try to build 2 different types of housing and a third use on that, and tell me how it's going to fit. It just doesn't make sense to try to pass this, removing that restriction, to say, yeah, you can do that, when in reality you can't. It just muddies the waters of the text of it changed, it didn't change, and what all was there. So that's the main concern with 2 acres. It also, the addition that you just made addressed one of my concerns, which was, okay, on the other side of downtown, you've got an apartment building, RM zone. So my neighbor has a half-acre residential lot. It's not surrounded by residential, it abuts RM zone. So I get a PD for that. Well, now the neighbor next to them is no longer surrounded by all residential. They're abutting a PD. So now can they apply for a PD and it just worked its way down the block in a chain? So having the goal of that, I'm not saying 2 acres is the magic number, because there probably should be some legal. If I've got 1.95 or something like that, or 1.8, and I can get a good design in, I think maybe there should be an opening for an appeal process to that. But trying to say that, oh, we got rid of residential downtown, here's how you're going to get it. You're going to take your quarter-acre lot, and you're going to come through as a PD, you're going to build 1 building, you can have apartments above and retail on the bottom, actually violates current city law of that zoning that you're trying to get them to apply for. So it's a no-go from the beginning.
You know the code better than I do.
It's actually, if you look, it's the section directly above what you were just reading from. I believe it's the 502, or it's the 02 instead of the 03, the purpose or intent of the district. I've got it right here, I believe.
We're in
It is
4.
19-502, permitted uses. And it says in there it is required to have housing of different types and densities, which I'm not familiar with the plans of the Earl Street project, but if I'd been around when that was going through, I'm pretty sure somebody could have just stood up and said, hey, this don't meet the requirements, and that whole project got stopped.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have some help from staff. He's saying, it's not possible.
This is kind of reflects some of the concerns from the city attorney about the Enabling Act established guidelines by which a municipality can do a plan development defining districts. And so I think what the gentleman who just spoke kind of echoes a concern heard by the city attorney that is a quarter-acre building a district? Is this what was intended by a plan development? Is it possible? I think the answer is yes. And that is it. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I don't have that in front of me, the one that he is quoting. So.
Well, generally speaking, what was just said is that a plan development, it says it is supposed to include a mix of residential and non-residential. It should include a mix of housing types, and it was designed to help protect natural and scenic features.
So a half acre or quarter acre is going to not be a mixture of buildings.
Well, it doesn't have to be a mixture of buildings. I said, again, I think this is all how a person interprets it, and that, historically, that, most plan developments are not a building. Earl Street is an example of one that was done as a building. It's the only one I'm aware of that was done as a building. Though we've had both Dockside and Kiwi Trail were discussed as in a similar vein. Patrick Square, I think, is what is a more classic traditional plan development.
Right.
It's a mix of housing types, mix of uses, and open space and innovative design and that kind of thing. But all that said, that the answer to your question is that is it possible? Yes, that the council and commission can make these decisions for how they want to interpret and apply this for the city of Clemson. And you've heard various viewpoints from different perspectives, and I think that it's up to you to decide what you think is right.
So my question is, because we're looking at a minimum of 2 acres, and then we have this further language with it, which John, is that your name? John has mentioned, so I'm going to assume he's correct. So so we have that language in there that now seems to be out of place. Just because I'm not looking at it. So
That's an interesting perspective, and I think I could go print you out a copy if you think it'd be helpful in y'all's deliberations. It wouldn't take me but a minute to have that language to see if removing the minimum acreage, in your opinion, would be in conflict with the purpose of the PD.
Okay.
If that would help you, I can.
What do you
Paragraph is
Oh, you've got
502,
it.
right?
502, I think that is
one
correct.
little paragraph. Yeah. But what I think we need to keep in mind is that if it's a PD, it's not a given that that's going to happen. That means you put your best foot into developing something that might work on the property that you have, and then there's a guarantee that will be approved. That's the whole purpose of the PD, is bringing it before this group for advice and final approval, and then taking it to council with that. So I personally favor only removing the minimum 2 acres from the commercial part and moving it to all other districts.
Yeah, but it looks to me like when this says, uses must include housing of different types and densities, in addition to compatible commercial uses or shopping centers, office parks, and mixed-use developments. And uses shall be restricted to those listed in the adopted plan. So it's a little wonky if we, I think he's right? Am I the only one that thinks that?
Well, actually, no, I mean, we had this discussion the last time, and I really don't think the PD is applicable at all. I understand where planning as well as city council wants to go, but I don't think PDs are the way to drive this out. It's just simply not in accordance with the directions that are given in the South Carolina Code for a PD. I mean, you just read it, and it's straight out of the code. It's not really ever intended to be for single buildings. It's kind of a misapplication of the entire thought of a PD. It just really doesn't match up very well.
Except that we have Earl Street.
Well, I understand.
And
If you look at the history of PDs, there's a lot has changed, I think, since they first started creating PDs, and you can correct me, but I think there were several that were created that would require things now that weren't required then. If you look on the city website and look at all the 19 or 20 or 22 PDs, and look at the ones way back, and they're just apartment complexes, and there's nothing really commercial about it. It doesn't meet all of the requirements that we have now. And I think if whatever we do with this part, at some point we need to come back and look at some other changes in the PD process. We can't do it tonight because it wasn't on the agenda, but we need to take into account the overlay districts, and we need to take into account perhaps what we had talked about requiring DAR.
But the overlay
That's
is
a part of it too.
But
part of
we
the
can't do that
next.
tonight.
Overlay is part of the next implementation.
Right.
So that's not going to ever happen tonight.
No, well, I know, I'm just saying there's some things that we need to come back to and tighten up the whole PD ordinance anyhow.
So a PD is going to look like something else. It's going to look like a quarter of an acre, and it's.
Do you think that would get through? I'm not sure that somebody could bring forth a sufficient plan for a quarter of an acre.
Well, we're not requiring, if you take out the minimum 2 acres and you don't have a requirement, then it's anything.
Still got to make this whole, wherever that list is, that whole list of things.
Okay. Right, but. Oh, will you come to the microphone?
Yeah,
Thank you,
I
John.
didn't know if I was allowed to come back up.
Oh, yes. Yes,
Okay, what I was going to say, I think you guys are hitting on some of the points that I was trying to make, is that by the city council passing this and saying, oh, we're going to allow this is how you're going to get your residential development, it's kind of just a statement, an empty statement, if you will, of, oh, we're still allowing it, but this is how you do it. However, there's not really any feasible way to actually still allow it. So in other words, oh, you can bring it forward, but we still have to approve it, and if you don't meet these requirements, well, sorry, if you have a quarter acre lot that you want to put some apartments on, I'm sorry, you just can't do that because your lot's not big enough. My feeling is all that's going to guarantee is property building, where instead of Joe, Sam, and Mike building separate buildings on their half-acre lots, somebody big's going to come in, buy up 4 half-acre lots, and they're going to be the one that still is able to get their PD through, because they can then accommodate all the requirements. So you're going to wind up with bigger singular buildings and developments than the smaller ones. And as far as Earl Street came up, and I was going to clarify my point on that, City Council is the governing body for this city. They can pass anything they want. Now, anybody in the public can challenge the legality of it. I mean, as long as they vote, it passes. If nobody challenges anything, it stays law until it gets challenged. So approving a PD, there's actually a 60-day limit on that zone change, because if you get halfway built in a building, you got $100 million in it, and somebody comes forward and they say, oh, you know what, you were right. Well, now that guy's out. It's unfair both ways. So if they approve something, even if it didn't meet that text, if that text was the exact same at the time and the city council approved it, fine, it's been approved, they can go, and just nobody challenged it. So that's the issue there, is that this city council may have one intention. You guys remove that 2-acre restriction, the next city council might say, let's put a 100-story building on top of Papa John's. Plus, none of this addresses the size and scope, which is what I've seen a lot of complaints about as far as the buildings downtown. Right now, I can still, without having to go through you or anybody else, drop a 50-foot office building right on top of Subway. Perfectly fits within the zone. On top of Subway downtown. I can build a 50-foot office building, not residential, but a 50-foot building nonetheless. So I think if the planning commission I understand we're voting on the 2 acres tonight, and I'm sorry for going off on a tangent, but
No, you're fine.
I think if the goal here is to address the development of downtown overall, then it does need to be done through the zoning regulations of this is what can be built in these districts. Hey, we don't like 50-foot buildings downtown. It's an overlay. Let's cap that at 35 or whatever it is, because it makes no sense to say I can have 35-foot apartment buildings, but I can have 50-foot office building right next to it. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Right, is that correct? What's the height limit downtown?
65 feet.
I thought it got lowered, significantly lowered.
It did. Well, it got lowered from 65 to 50 feet, and that, so our C district height limit is 50 feet. CM is 40 feet with an additional 10 feet if you meet certain standards, step back and extending your rear buffer yard. And then our CP2 is 40 feet and
Is 40?
40. And so,
50, 40, and
Mr. Crowley is absolutely correct that the height for downtown is 50 feet.
Interesting. Okay, do we have anybody else from the public or any phone calls? Okay,
I have some comments, but it doesn't pertain to this.
who did offer a public any
no,
comment?
it wasn't.
Who don't?
I guess then you will need to come to the next planning commission meeting, because we're only allowed to discuss the 2 things that were on the agenda, because this is a special called meeting. So I can only discuss the minimum acreage for a PD, and I could discuss the change in our rules. This is a different meeting. So I can't, I guess we can discuss things, we can't vote. So yeah, okay, sorry, I just have to work it in. So come on, and
May I make a
in
suggestion
public,
that maybe
yes, please.
close this issue?
Yes,
And
sir.
then y'all are free to discuss anything you would like.
Okay. Well, I'm a little afraid of it now. And that's it. I also, I drive 15 miles an hour when it says drop 15 miles an hour. So,
I have a question for the person that just spoke.
Mr. Crowley, sorry. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yes, please come back, if you will.
There.
And this is Jackie Myers, and she is from a remote location, but she is equivalent to us.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
What is your objection to the 2-acre minimum? What is you said a lot of things, but what is your clear objection to the 2-acre minimum? Is it in the commercial district? Is it for the residential? Is it for the mixed use? What is your objection?
My objection to that is not necessarily to removing the 2 acres, but removing it in total. If you wanted to provide some kind of percentage leeway, if a certain plan had this or that, I think that would be okay, because saying that somebody who has 1.99 acres can't develop and somebody that has 2.01 can is a little bit ridiculous. But I understand you have to put numbers in somewhere. My main objection is, like I said, where when you get into those small acres, there is always a plot of land somewhere that is wound up how it has, whether it's the old gas station or this, or where, like I said, those properties back up to some of the apartment buildings, the older apartment buildings downtown, where you can start that waterfall effect of going down the rules. And it's all done legally at that point. Now, granted, those all have to be approved, and I don't think current council or anybody would approve a necessary run of PDs like that. But this being the law, I don't know how long it's going to be on the books. It might be 20 years. And in 10 years, there may be a different council that says, you know what, downtown, we want as much and as big as we can go. So now that we can put PDs on half-acre lots, let's make them 80 foot tall. We'll start here, and as soon as he gets his, this guy can apply, and then this guy can apply, and then this guy can apply. That would be my main objection to removing the 2 acres.
Thank you.
And you're concerned about removing it from the commercial district, not, you're okay with
Commercial district as well, because there's residential properties that do back up directly to commercial properties. So,
Now that part I agree with you on.
so like
Sorry,
downtown, there are some houses that back directly up to commercial zoning. Now, I understand that the purpose and intent was to have buffers and things like that, but there are some that back directly up, and they back up to PDs. There's residentials on, I think it's the west side, that back up to Earl Street. They have adjoining property. So now, technically, those properties aren't surrounded by R12 or R20. They've got a PD on one side. The properties right here, right across the street, are not surrounded by R12 and R20. In their backyard is a PD, it's City Hall. So those technically would fall under those rules.
they don't have to be surrounded, right? They just have to on one side.
No, what I'm saying is to fall under the 4 acre requirement. The 4 acre requirement that would be left in would be completely surrounded.
Correct.
So if you remove that, and I'm only bordered on 3 sides, now I fall under the other non-restricted side, because I'm not completely surrounded. So that house right across the street could put an apartment building up if it was approved. So there's a lot of unintended consequences with stuff like this that have to be really, really thought out. And it's not saying that anybody has bad motives or anything like that, because I don't believe they do. It's just when you try, I believe honestly that this is trying to fix a problem that's been a long time coming and trying to get it done quick, and I don't think that's going to lead to very good outcomes. I believe you're in favor of just more of amending the actual zoning in the districts versus making every different project be a PD. Because you're also going to wind up with 40 different districts in town, technically, if you do this way, because every PD has its own setbacks, its own regulations, its own densities, its own height requirements, everything like that. And I'm sure they're online somewhere, but they are not as easily available as the zoning code that I can pull up and read through in 20 minutes. I'm sure that the PD requirements for Earl Street are there. They say, here's the density, the setbacks, but me buying the house next door, I can't find those. So,
Thank you. You make some really, really good points, and I'm all about making sure we don't leave any loopholes.
yeah, that's my
trying to-
concern, basically. There's any technical spots in there where something could walk through and create a potentially bigger problem.
Correct. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So it was my understanding that council wanted a way to provide for residential in the commercial, that they were no longer allowing residential. And this was the way they tried to do it, and I think this gentleman has pointed out issues that I was not aware of. I never thought of. So he might get the gold star this week. That usually goes to you.
Well, I mean,
And you,
what John said, I mean, I'd already written down, I got it
Okay.
in red here, unintended consequences, because this thing goes all over the place. There's just lots of things that would happen. Non-uniform application, because everyone's going to be a separate entity, and we'll have, I saw how some of the more recent PDs or attempted PDs have gone, and quite honestly, not too good. They ended up going through the codes. And I really think the code is the way to handle this, not necessarily trying to put everything into the PD box, because that's not where this stuff needs to go. I mean, it's handy, it's a way to do it, and it's a way to control it, but I don't believe it's the correct way to do it. It's more defendable, I'll use that word. So, and the fact that every PD will be coming through the planning commission, and we'll have to apply potentially different rules everywhere, so they're uniform applications. If we change the planning commission members, as we do every year or so, we'll see different requirements perhaps. And I don't think that's where we want to go. I think we need to be uniform as to what we're going to do. And the only way I know to do that is put it in the code. And we know what we want to do. I'm pretty sure we just need to go do it.
All right.
That was my.
I have another question.
Who is it to?
Who was just talking?
Are you talking about Curtis or Mr. Proley?
Curtis. What is it that the city council is trying to do by doing it this way? Why can't we go through the code process? Would it take longer? Is there a reason why they need us to do this quickly?
I believe that's generally the case, Jackie. This is expeditious way to move forward.
Stopgap measure is what I thought it was.
And I guess that's one of the reasons why there's some discussion about sunset rule as far as when this would be allowed to a point and it would revert back to the original requirements. But I guess that was one of the reasons why I asked earlier if we could establish that timeline, and we haven't. So it's just basically just an interim measure to potentially move forward, which could cause, once again, back to the infamous words, unintended consequences.
Yeah, a lot of when I was listening, a number of landowners had small pieces, and they were talking about a retail level, maybe a restaurant level, and then livable space at the top, and that was it. So, and they were upset that they were not able to do something like that with their property. That's what I was listening to. So I did not think about what would happen in this case. So I guess what we need to do, if we can, is decide what it is that we want to. Are we going to postpone this? Are we going to give the feedback to the council that there are unintended consequences?
Didn't we have that with the zoning we already had? Isn't that why we ended up with so many ideas of these tiered housing projects?
Unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Right. And I think people, they kept talking, when I was listening, they kept talking about by right development of their property. So I guess that was kind of like, this was a way to give people another way to develop in order to have residential, and that was it. That's all I can say. And if we just think this is not the right step, then I guess I don't know. We just have to have some wording for the council. I don't know that it requires a vote to have wording, unless we just say we do not support. We just support the regulations as they read now. So if somebody wants to make a motion to that, and then council can grill us later, I guess. Or they can watch our video here. Like I watched theirs. I don't know. Do what?
I think the more I hear, the more what I have to say may be appropriate.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll allow, please come speak. This is Dr. Skelton, and I know Dr. Skelton from Clemson.
I think I had some incorrect information to start with about what this meeting was about, and I'm sorry about that. But it turns out that I may be in the right place after all. So let me sign in.
That's a good unintended consequence.
I thank you for allowing me to share a
Do
few
you mind
thoughts.
stating your name and address?
And I thank each of you for your volunteer service on the very important planning commission.
Thank you. So you're Dr. Skelton and you live at the Downs? You live at the Downs? Can you hear me?
I cannot hear well. I have hearing aids,
Oh, sure.
and the acoustics in here are
They're rough.
really not the best.
They're absolutely awful. So you are Dr. Skelton.
I'm Tom Skelton,
Thank you.
yes,
And you live at,
1030 Keystone Lane
okay,
in Clemson. And we own property at the junction of Clemson, College Avenue and Highway 93, commercial property. I don't suppose many people, well, I know there aren't many people that appreciate some of the buildings that have been recently built in Clemson. The zoning ordinance, though, was modified about 2 or 3 years ago and currently requires a setback, I believe, of 25 feet. 25 or 35 feet above street level. And that will prevent future buildings that are built almost on the property line and extend straight up 60 feet in the air. Recently, there was a recommendation to the City Council to deny mixed-use building in commercial zone areas. Specifically, no residential Reed student housing. The council decided to study the issue more, and I suppose they're looking to the Planning Commission for a recommendation. And Mr. Stedman, if I wander off track and I say something that I don't remember, please correct me.
You're doing fine,
you
sir.
sound great.
Yeah, you seem
I
right
did
on
not
track.
hear everything that I heard in here at the last meeting. The cost of land in Clemson is quite expensive, and multi-story buildings are necessary to be economically feasible in most situations. If mixed residential commercial is not allowed in these areas, there will be little or no demand for the second, third, and fourth floor space. What I'm saying is, it's very difficult to lease anything commercially above the ground floor. About the only demand for that would be office space, and there's very little demand for office space in a small town like Clemson. And I time my remarks to be within the 3-minute time limit. So, in summary, to deny residential use in commercial zones will in effect be a taking of private property, and it will cause serious economic damage. And I respectfully request that you do not recommend any change that will result in denying mixed-use commercial residential in uptown Clemson. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I don't follow on that, I'll be okay.
Can somebody? Okay, we appreciate that. Okay, Commissioner, do I hear a motion? Do you want some more discussion? Or we'll have discussion after someone makes a motion.
We have somebody who's.
Oh, wonderful.
opportunity to talk.
Okay, will you sign in and tell us your name and address?
Surely, my name is Dave Johnson. My address is 206 Island View Lane. And that's in Seneca.
But I bet you're a property.
I believe everyone's trying to do a good thing for Clemson. I really do. But we've been talking a little bit about unintended consequences. And so, and I also believe that Curtis is accurate that forcing everyone to go through a PD is going to be a real mess. It'll cause a lot of problems on staff. You're going to have a ton of different regulations on each different PD. I own a commercial property in the uptown area
Of Clemson.
of Clemson. In fact, it's probably, I am unaware of a larger office space. It's the Wall Street Center. So I'm very familiar with the office market and the demand for commercial property in Clemson. There's a lot of vacancies too, and part of that is because they were forced to build the commercial underneath those buildings. But that's a whole nother subject. We can't, there's no residential around our property. It's completely commercial. I have 1.48 acres.
How much?
1.48. So it's less than 2 acres. If you look at the white paper report, they say that right where I'm at should be the multi-purpose residential. And I may be the term high density, mixed use. There you go. Thank you. But under what's currently being planned, which is no residential in commercial, unless it's a PD, and currently, or what's proposed, and what y'all are discussing now, and unless it's 2 acres, no PD. So I am unaware of anything other than maybe 2 or 3 properties in the entire city that are at least 2 acres and commercial. So basically, it's a continuation of the moratorium, because you have to go with a PD and you have to have 2 acres. If you think about it, I think there's only 2 or 3 properties in the entire city that would be able to be developed. So it's a continuation of the moratorium. It's also, as Mr. Skelton said, a taking. The value of my property, it's estimated, would go down approximately $1.5 million. So I'm quite fearful of that. Now, I understand that you're probably going to maybe give it back to me in the future after the charrette and the overlay and the catalyst zones. But I'm almost thinking we did this a little bit backwards. I think we should do the catalyst zones and the overlays, or go through the codes, because this really is kind of a stopgap measure, which is really simply an extension of the moratorium. I really hope you can understand that. I would challenge you guys to give me more than 2 or 3 properties that could be developed under the proposed verbiage. It just can't happen. Just like the gentleman said, it's impossible. There's only a few. And the history that I have with governments is once they take something away from you, it's pretty hard to get it back. And so I'm not planning on developing my property right now, and I want to do something that's good for the city. And I'm more than willing to go through the codes and go through the architectural review boards and the council and the planning commission, and hey, is this going to be what the city wants? I actually have great visions for what the city is. I can imagine Main Street is, you know, downtown Disneyland. And, you know, you got little trolleys that take people back and forth, and you have a big parking structure on this end. Get people to park and transport them up and down. There's only, I think, 82 parking spaces on all of College Avenue. It's a real problem. And some of those things need to be addressed first. But when you shut everything down, what happens is you force development elsewhere. And then the city doesn't get the tax revenue. So there's a lot of unintended consequences, and I'm sorry, I probably went long.
You're fine.
But
I believe I heard you speak. I watched the June 7th City Council meeting.
I was disappointed in my demeanor there, and I hope I've been better. I wrote all the council members an apology.
I can't answer that. I try as chair to understand people when they're upset over their income and their property. I'm new, you know, so.
I am very fearful.
So I appreciate your being here today and telling us. So I guess I didn't notice you being ugly to
Okay, well,
the
thank
city
you.
council. I can't answer that. All right, thank you so much. This is very helpful. This is concerning. And again, I guess, do we have anybody else that wants to speak? Appreciate you coming back to see us. All right, commissioners, I think let's start with you. Anything you want to summarize or say? You've now heard Mr. Johnson and
No, I guess I'm supportive of not having PD for downtown. Once again, back to we'll wear out the phrase unintended consequences.
Okay.
So I don't know whether we get a motion. I'm not proposing one.
okay.
Whether we have a no motion or we have a recommendation or some combination thereof, or we do something different.
All right, Brad. And by the way, Brad is our traffic guru.
I'm just concerned about density in the downtown area. We're already too condensed. Trying to protect the integrity of 123, but also protect property rights too. So I don't know that I can even vote tonight.
Okay. So far, I don't have a motion of any kind. I'm happy.
I'll tell you, I do support removing the minimum PD requirement in the commercial districts. Much like what I read to start with, but leaving the minimum 2 acres in the other districts. And then with that one exception. And it doesn't say surround, it says adjoined. When it says
Join on all sides.
On all sides.
adjoined
it's
solely.
surrounded.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
Keep it.
All right,
So
so,
you're talking about leaving it where now?
well, she's changed.
No
it.
minimum acreage for PDs in the commercial zone districts. Then leave the wording about the R12, R20, and then PDs in any other zoning districts must be a minimum of 2 contiguous acres.
I need a second.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. I'm still worried about what Mr. Crowley? Thank you, I'm sorry. I've never heard that name before, so.
I'm used to it.
I'm concerned about what Mr. Crowley is talking about.
I think we've never actually approved an official density in any of those zoning districts, have we, Todd?
That is correct. We have not
We talked about
We
200.
proposed it.
Yeah, but we never got to that point when everything else stopped and we haven't gone back.
And then we
back
had
to
the
that.
moratorium
Yeah,
started.
Correct.
So there's some language in here that I think does need to be cleared up if we move forward with what
And the
I just
language
made, the motion
in,
I just made.
are you talking about 502 or 503?
I'm talking about all in the 503.
Jackie, do you have any further comments?
No, well, only that we address the unintended consequences that have been brought to our attention. I think that's important. Just like the gentleman that just spoke said that he's willing to work with us and go through the proper channels. We just need to make sure that the proper channels are good for the citizens of the Clemson. And going back to the unintended consequences, I think that's an important point. I'm not sure if we need to put that in or make some kind of recommendation, or I'm not sure how to move forward with that, but I do think it needs to be addressed.
Okay, well, I'm sure that feedback will get back to Planning Commission. I'm sorry. City Council, excuse me. We don't run the city. Through Todd, and if we have a representative at the next meeting that applies. So now we've had a motion and a second, and the motion had to do with taking the minimum requirement of 2 acres out of the commercial district, and that was all. Okay? All right, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Jackie, what's your vote?
I raised my hand.
She said she raised her hand.
You raised your hand, so there's 3. All opposed. So it's 3-2, and the motion carries. Thank you, council. Thank you, commissioners. I'm sorry. I'm telling you, I watched council meetings for a couple hours today, so I keep saying council. All right, then. I believe that if anybody has something else they wish to discuss, you can certainly come forward.
Remember, ours is a recommendation to council. Council will have to vote to approve this to finalize it.
Right. So,
There will be a public hearing on this on July 6th at 5:30.
all right. There'll be a
Apologize, I
blast
should have
email?
spoken. That there will be a public hearing on this July 6th before council. That's Tuesday night because Monday is the observed 4th of July holiday. That has been advertised and a blast email has gone out. Again, that's the public hearing, and that historically the commission did not address council at the public hearing. It was when it would come up for a first reading that y'all might want to have representation. You're free to certainly speak at the public hearing as well, but what I will do is present a summary of what occurred tonight, what the motion was and what the vote was, and then we'll hear from the public that night. And my assumption is that July 19th, which would be council's next meeting, they would take up this matter as a first reading, but we'll notify you ahead of time for that, and it will be after y'all's regular meeting, which is July 12th.
Oh,
Yeah. So my point is that y'all will know before it's on the council's agenda for a first reading.
okay, thank you.
So that first reading will not occur before July the 19th. Is that correct?
It is possible for council to have a public hearing and first reading the same night, but I don't believe that is their intention. Has the agenda been published for the council meeting? But that is not their, to my knowledge, that's not what they intend to do. There'll be a public hearing, and then following that will be the first reading. That's a normal way of doing things.
Alrighty, then, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll give you a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay,
Okay.
all those in favor, voice vote, and Jackie. Jackie, are you ready to adjourn?